When you moved into where you live, did anyone tell you that you needed flood insurance? If not, it's probably because you're not living on what's known as a floodplain area traditionally susceptible to flooding. As the climate crisis intensifies, that might be screwing you over though, as traditional property insurance doesn't cover flood events.
This question comes up, why do people live in these places? They need to move on. And I think when an event like what we saw in California happens, that idea really kind of falls apart a little bit. We're talking about entire cities, entire regions of the country that face major loss. And I think that's the type of thing we're going to see more of.
Flood insurance is one of those things that a lot of people talk about, but not many really understand. And as the US is hit with more severe rainfall and flooding events like what we saw in places like California and Las Vegas recently, many people are beginning to realize that whether they live in an area prone to flooding or not, flood insurance is becoming a necessity.
How do we basically provide for financial security in a world where we expect to see more floods, more intense floods with more frequency?
Rebecca Elliott is an associate professor of sociology at the London School of Economics and author of Underwater, a book that explores the US's National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP. What's the NFIP, you ask? Well, it's a program managed by FEMA that enables homeowners, business owners, and renters to buy flood insurance from a network of companies. The program was implemented in the late 1960s, but as the planet has gotten warmer, it's become an issue.
Basically, since Hurricane Katrina in 2005, it's run up a huge debt to the US Treasury that it's never really been able to pay back. Parts of that debt have been forgiven, but it's kind of massively in the red, which means that it's an object of a lot of commentary, a lot of reform, a lot of discussion about how do we price flood insurance appropriately, how do we get more people to purchase it.
But getting more people to purchase flood insurance might be an issue. Changing weather patterns like the extended period of drought in the western US and a lack of updated flood maps cause some people to think they no longer need flood insurance. In reality though, they probably do.
Economists who've studied flood insurance have observed that people buy a flood policy after a flood, and then they let it lapse after a couple of years. And so it could have been the case that many Californians did at some point during their housing tenure have a flood policy, but when there's a long drought, year on year, it seems less and less like an expense worth paying, perhaps, to a lot of people. And so they let those policies lapse. And then by the time you do have a major flood event, you haven't had the policy in place for a long time.
Elliott says that as the climate crisis intensifies and natural disasters like floods, wildfires, and extreme weather events become more common, insurance should be looked at more broadly.
I think that's a world where we need to be thinking about how we socialize risk generally. Thinking maybe beyond the flood insurance program to think about how do we keep people housed and financially secure in a world of natural disaster. We should think about socializing the risk more broadly, expanding the mandatory purchase requirement, making sure that whether or not you think you need a flood policy, you actually have to have one. And to think beyond these kinds of relatively small flood zones to more generally about larger swaths of the US geography, especially because flood risk is changing with the intensification of the climate crisis.